Chet, I cannot tell if you're speaking or not, but if you are, I don't hear a word.
Same here. I thought it was my headphones.
Is this any better?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Let me go back. On a day where you think that everything's going right. That's good. All right. Keep me humble. Oops. How did I get there? Let me get out of there and get back up here and hit this. There we go. All right. Back on track. Okay. The thought for the year. My point is, it's in the combination of consistency and agility that leaders become strategic. And so our goal for this year is to work on our consistency and our agility, and through that combination, become more strategic in our thinking and in our work. I went to Johns Hopkins, which has been my source throughout the pandemic, to find out where they thought we were with it. And they have announced that they've stopped. They're no longer tracking the daily updates. They're still tracking, but they're not doing it on a daily basis. And they believe now that this has hit the level of the normal, how can I say normal? The normal influenza levels across the globe. And so at this point, they've stopped doing the specific reporting that they were doing, and they're rolling the numbers into their general reporting. And I don't think that that has a whole lot of bearing on what we're talking about at this point. So I won't be sharing their information anymore. They're not sharing with me. I'm not sharing with you. So last month and the month before that, we talked about the volumes from China being lower, freight coming in, the number of ships and so on. And that's true. The number of ships docking has dropped, but not significantly, but it's lower than it was. But we're also seeing that the orders and the quantities of materials that are being ordered are dropping as well. There could be a couple of reasons for this. One could be the economy in the US. The other could be that China is still trying to get back together. They had their epidemic, their pandemic after the rest of the world had theirs. And it had a fairly significant impact on their ability to produce and meet schedules. And they're just now starting to get back. So we'll have to wait and see a little bit about what's going to happen there. There is fallout from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the visit of Xi to Moscow to visit with Putin this week has certainly led people to say, well, is this, what's this going to bring? And we don't know. But if the outcome of that is benign, as some people say it is, China is going to continue to sit on the sideline. The political talkers were saying that Xi went home with a whole basket full of goodies for the Chinese people, because Russia will be selling them less expensive oil and other things. They'll have access to agriculture that they haven't had before. And so, and Russia got nothing out of it other than a photo op for the two leaders. So that's on the one side. On the other side, some are saying, well, there's still a deals in the works of arms and ammunition that China is going to provide to Russia. If that happens, then it's quite likely that the US will start to tighten the economic screws on China as best they can. What would that mean? Well, we may see higher tariffs on materials coming from China, making it more difficult for the trade to take place, putting other or new laws in place that would slow down the process of buying from China. Either way, whichever of those or some third option, we know the one thing that we know for sure coming out of last week into this week is that we're likely to see more weapon systems going to Ukraine to ramp them up and help them push Russia back. Xi, if you haven't been following, suggested that he did a 12-statement model for what he thought might be a good peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. And the first one sounded great, but then after that, he said, everything stays in place. Nobody changed, the lines don't change from where they are today. Well, then Russia would benefit because Russia has pushed in and taken land. So that's still up in the mix. We are focused on that as a country, and trade at this point is being driven sort of as a secondary thing, and we'll use it as a stick. We're using it as a stick with Russia. We'll use it as a stick with China if they decide to get involved. My thought on this is let's watch the rhetoric and see what happens. If you follow these things, a week or two ago, the Chinese trade minister spoke very harshly about the US and its move against TikTok. He said that it was just overblown and it just showed that, excuse me, that the US was just working to end trade with China. And it stands out because normally people at his level of government are relatively soft-spoken, and they make sure that the president of China is in the room and standing very strongly behind him. So he spoke out at another meeting, and it sort of caught people's attention. If the president and the members of Congress continue to respond with demands that TikTok break away, they started those demands about the same time. Well, it got more unified once the trade minister said he felt that it was the wrong thing for the US to do. And so what we see now is banding together two sides. So the Congress jumped in, and the requirements and the passing of new laws and all of that is sort of in the works. What's going to be the response from China? So if China helps Russia with arms and they stay defiant, that's going to have one impact on trade. If they quiet and the talks move back into the diplomatic channels, and this thing becomes nothing more than a tempest in a teapot, then we'll probably see a lightening, if you will, of the requirements to move product out of China and into the US. So we'll see more trade coming from China. So the impact on the USMCA, as we look at it, Here in the three countries, demand is softening because we're fighting inflation and the bank collapses. So we're seeing demand soften. It's just now starting. The Fed is still pushing hard, raising rates and trying to stop inflation. But with the banks and everything going, a little wonky, we may see even further softenings in demand, and with that, we'll see less trade. We won't be driving the trade as hard. Less material coming from China will mean there are more opportunities for companies in North America. Last time we talked about the plant up in New York, where they're refurbishing that plant and opening that plant up to make ICs for Ford. So it's growing. We're seeing more and more opportunities for the companies here in North America to grow their footprint. But we as practitioners need to watch our incoming supply chains. There may be surprises in those changes, because as we may reduce imports on things that we believe we can buy out of the North American market, and only when we find we really can't buy, or we can't buy the volume out of the North American market, we may have a problem. So look at your supply chains. Look at the products that you're getting that are currently coming from outside North America, and start looking at what can you do. What are your options, and where else could you find this material? It's not a fool's errand. It's something that I think we're going to need in the next few months, the next year. There's coming a time where we're going to need that kind of information. So being prepared now will help you later. So you don't want to look dumb, but you'll never look at KPIs the same again. I love this. Thank you, Deanna.
You're welcome.
The auto assembly pipeline. One of the attendees asked about this, and so I thought I'd spend just a couple of minutes on it. The assembly plants have a number for output every day, whatever that number of cars is. For the Cadillac plant in Bowling Green, Kentucky, their number is 240. They make 240 Corvettes. They make 240 of the small Cadillacs every day. That's their number. So their goal is to make that number. And any of you that have dealt directly with the tier one and tier and the assembly plants know, if you're short on something, they make you pay a lot of money to get them back up and get them going, because they have to make that number. And most days they do make their number, but some days they don't. And when they don't, then they have excess inventory, because it wasn't all their suppliers who didn't get product to them on time. It was one supplier or maybe two. So they have the material from all their other suppliers, and yeah, it's on Kanbans, and the Kanbans are full, but then that stacks up at the tier ones, and the tier ones have excess inventory, and the assembly plant is full. So some of the suppliers have excess, others, they're straining, right? Because they were running behind. Now there's been a slack in the schedule. They're starting to catch up a little bit, but they're working hard to do that. as you go from the tier ones to the tier twos and then out to the tier threes, the further up the chain, the worse it becomes. You have production problems, inventory errors, lot sizes closer to assembly have more impact on the tier two, tier three group of suppliers. Now, if you have questions about this and you've ever attended the beer game, which we put on from time to time, then you remember the answer. If you have an issue, it becomes a big issue further up the chain. So be aware, but if you manage your production to meet the assembly rate, if you make parts for the Corvette and you make 240 parts a day, you may have excess for a little while because there was some other problem at the assembly plant. But if you're making 240 a day, it's going to catch up, they're going to use them, and the parts are going to go away. If you stop and you say, well, we'll just wait here until everything starts up again, then they decide they're going to work overtime because they need to make the number, then you're short. So plan your buffers and work with your production people to set the assembly rates on the products that you're manufacturing so that you're meeting the assembly rate. Then if you've got spare parts and other considerations, you can put those in place, but don't overproduce and try to make your production as consistent as possible. Now, if you were the person that shut down the line, oops, you're going to have to react, and reacting to every change costs you money. So try not to change. Be consistent. Another question that came up was inventory accuracy, and we're constantly talking about inventory accuracy. It's probably the most common KPI in materials management. And quite honestly, I've been doing this for 44, 45 years now. It's really quite simple. Banks have a 100% accuracy rate. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have mistakes, but they uncover their mistakes very early and they fix the mistake. So their inventory accuracy is 100%. It's simple, but don't confuse simple with easy. They're two different words, they're two different things. Lean is simple. Lean is not necessarily easy. Inventory accuracy is simple, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. Think about it. Every operator in your facility handles inventory, either loading a machine, unloading a machine, moving parts around in his little work area. They all handle inventory. Your receiving department, your quality control, the warehouse, the operations, finished goods warehouse, all of those folks handle the inventory. And they move inventory and they keep the inventory, they put the inventory away, they pick the inventory. They're constantly counting and weighing and doing all of this. And we want it to be accurate because that impacts all of the different parts of the company. We impact quality, we impact cost, we impact service, all of that. If our inventory is accurate, all of those things are better. If our inventory is inaccurate, all of those things become more problematic. So how do we document the accuracy? Well, many companies, I want to say most companies, go to cycle counting. And for those of you who aren't aware, cycle counting, you set up a list of items and every day you run the list and you go out and you count the parts. And the number of parts that you count depends on how you put the list together. And I'm not going to get into how to do that today, but we can cover that in another session if you want. So we create the list, we set up the frequency, and then we go out day in and day out, and we count. Now, who does the counting? Normally, it's a cycle counter. Now, that cycle counter may be hired specifically to count inventory and do the cycle counts. It may be a warehouse person. It could be every operator in his or her area, but they do the cycle count. And so we do the cycle count, and then we record the number on the cycle count sheet, and then we check that sheet against the current count in the system. What is in the system. So we have the current count, what we counted, and then we check the system. Then we go through and make sure that we haven't missed any transactions, or we've got good cutoffs for the count. We make sure all of that happens. And then if it's within tolerance, we say we hit the number and we're successful. So what's the tolerance? Well, the tolerance depends on your company and how they view the inventory. On some items, they might say, we'll have a tolerance of plus or minus 0. On other items, they say we have a plus or minus of 50, depending on the cost of the part and the priority and so on and so forth. It may make sense. If you're counting little tiny pieces of something, and normally you just take a bag full and you put them on a weigh scale, you don't want to then take them off and count them manually and say, oh yeah, we were one short or we were one over. It doesn't make any sense. So we give a tolerance to it, and sometimes we even say, and we're going to use this technique to do it. We're going to use weigh scales, and you use the automatic counting process within the weigh scale to tell you when you've got a good count. So you hit that number, you're within the tolerance, it's a hit. And at the end of the day, you count up all your hits and all your misses, and you say, we had 7 hits out of 10 counts. We have 70% accuracy. Is that right or not? I mean, how do we document this? We can quibble over whether that's the best way or not. And then the tolerance and the definition of the tolerance, that's going to be a part of the business. What's the material that you're talking about? If you've got a single component that costs a couple $100,000, you're probably not going to have a tolerance on it. Its tolerance is going to be 0. But again, if you're counting sequins or something like that, do you want it right to the number? So you have to use some common sense, and then you test the validity of your cycle count. How do you test the validity of your cycle counts? You go off and you test the inventory. You run tests on random counts, or you run tests on empty locations. There are ways of testing to make sure that your cycle counts are doing what they say they're doing, that we're actually counting, and we have that level of accuracy. So here's another suggestion from Deanna. I'll give you a moment to think about that. And then, the last question is, how many studies showed that? 87. Making up the numbers as we go. We need to make sure that we're not making up the numbers, but we also need to make sure that we're not so caught up in the numbers that we're missing the opportunities. So if you're not doing cycle counting, and even if you are, in many companies, they'll decide that you have to do a physical inventory. we were working our way out of physical inventories and getting away from them back in the 70s and 80s. And companies were moving away fairly quickly from physical inventory. And then we ran into this problem, and we saw Sarbanes-Oxley enacted. Sarbanes-Oxley is a law, a series of laws named after the two people who brought it forward, Senator Sarbanes and Representative Oxley. And they were upset about fraud and the way companies were misstating their assets. And so they made the law, inventories must be at least 97% of value reflected in your public reports, or the CEO, CFO, and or others may go to jail. It's pretty straightforward. So it was at that point, because remember, a physical inventory doesn't count the inventory accuracy. It doesn't make your inventory more accurate. It counts the value of the inventory. That's what it's there for. Now, in olden days, when I first started, we used it to improve the accuracy of the inventory because we didn't have any accuracy of our inventory. We hadn't figured out cycle counting at that point. And so we would have to get everything out of the corners and all the WIP inventory and everything else, and we'd count it all. And that was the best count we had all year. And so we'd say, yeah, we use a physical inventory, and that's where we base our inventory. Once we went to cycle counts, and cycle counts are item by item, and you get to 98 or 99% accurate item by item, then you don't want to do a physical inventory again. If you do a physical inventory, normally a physical inventory will end with an inventory accuracy somewhere in the low 90s or upper 80s, depending on how well it was done. Well, if you've got 98% accuracy based on your cycle count, you've only got a maximum of 2% variance in cost. If everything that's wrong is a cost variance, you've got, and variances when we talk about cost and value are fungible. They net out. Positives offset negatives, negatives offset positives. So in cycle counting, we are doing everything in absolute terms. Doesn't matter whether it's higher or lower, it's wrong. So when your cycle count accuracy is higher and it's verified, then you have a much better chance just running the costing report off the existing inventory and using that number. But the CEO, CFO, and others don't want to go to jail. So they fall back to the tools that they've always used, which is the physical inventory. If you have high cycle count accuracy, challenge the validity of the numbers, push back against the physical inventories. Now, yours truly has done this in the past, and if you want to get fired, and I don't recommend that you do, but one in this group did. I can speak from my own knowledge. I was told that I had to do a physical inventory, and I knew that my cycle count inventory accuracy for the plant was getting very close to 99%. And when that's the case, if you want to have some fun, at the meetings before the inventory, tell them what the variance is going to be. We're going to do a physical inventory, and the variance is going to be $680. That was the number I chose. I did that a week before the physical inventory, and then we did the physical inventory, and we hit the variance number. I think it was 681 or 682, but it was within a couple of bucks of what I said it was going to be. Corporate was a little distressed. They had sent in some corporate auditors. They had sent in 2 audit teams from outside the company, and the assistant to the CFO was on hand for the whole inventory. And when they finished, they knew I was right, but they knew that the inventory was correct as well. And that led to some repercussions. So if you want to get fired, you can follow that track. If you don't want to get fired, don't do that. But you'll be able to tell them, don't what do you want the variance to be? Because all you're doing, think about it, you've done everything else, you fixed all the major errors, and now all you're doing is you're looking at those that are over and those that are under, and you walk it down to a point, and then accounting looks at it and goes, oh, that's close enough, and they turn it off. Well, you can continue to make it close enough until you get to the number you said it was going to be, and then you can turn it off. Same thing, it's just you're picking the number. Anyway, that's my stuff for today. We want to offer our congratulations to Sal Paz for his CLTD certification. Congratulations, Sal. That's really cool. We had some issues for those of you that attended our professional development meeting. There were some issues with the sound. We seem to be having that problem. We're going to redo that on Wednesday, the 29th of March at 6 p.m. Dr. Vieta will go ahead and redo that presentation, and we'll make sure that the sound is working this time. Okay, any other things that you have, any questions, leave them or contact Deanna and we'll get them on the agenda. Thank you all so much. Have a good week.
Pat,
Yes.
you had a question early on from Lily Dominguez about TikTok.
Okay. Okay.
Is it about the social media or why is it important?
Okay. Great question.
Hello, this is Lonnie.
The answer, Lily,
Oh,
is
good, Vidal.
TikTok is TikTok is
Okay,
supposedly
I'm in the tail end of a webinar. Let me finish that. And I'll
supposedly
get back to you in
TikTok
about 15 minutes.
is
I promise I'll call this time.
recording people's information along
Okay,
with
really good.
facial
Thanks, Vidal.
recognition and other things, and they're feeding that back to the Chinese government. And TikTok is the most popular app in the world at this point. And so the government, the US government and other governments, it isn't just the US government, the EU is going in the same direction. They feel that TikTok and its ties to the Chinese government make it untenable. We don't want all of our young people to have their faces recognized and all of their personal data stored and accessible by a foreign government. So that's why they're picking on TikTok. Okay, any other questions? All right, have a great week, a great month. We'll see you in a while.
Thanks, Chet.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chet.
Thank you, Chet.